Breakfast.
Suckling on the teat of tech.
With Paul Brislen.
The high-tech stories of the week. Paul Brislen on Twitter. G'day there, Paul.
Good morning, how are you?
Good, and some worrying trends is what we're covering today. A couple of issues. First up, the White House is asking registrars to block websites that the White House deems, unworthy or that they don't like.
Yeah, this is right. This is really quite an alarming move. There's long been a bit of a tussle between the US government and the people that run the internet as such, an organization called ICANN, which has been given the rights to run the domain name system that is the backbone of a lot of what we do on the web and on the internet. So the White House is currently proposing a new law be introduced in America called, I think it's COICA, Combating Online Infringement and Counterfeits Act, which is all about blocking websites that pretend to sell stuff that it actually doesn't have. You know, the sort of the counterfeit handbags and, more alarmingly, of course, drugs. It's big business in the US, the pharmaceutical industry, and so, somebody who's selling knockoff counterfeit drugs online is really quite a problem.
Well, that sounds like a good idea, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, so far so good.
Yeah.
In theory, in practice, what it means is that the US government will decide which websites are deemed to be infringing activities. Now, supposing they decide that the New Zealand Pharmac medical group that we have here that looks after drug buying for New Zealand, suppose they decide that they're in infringement of US laws. Presumably they'll be moving to shut down Pharmac's website because it breaches a US law. So what we've got in effect is the US government trying to define laws for all of the world because it feels that it runs the internet. And this is really quite an alarming move. We've already seen the likes of Tim Berners-Lee, who came up with the idea for the World Wide Web in the first place, come out and say, no, this act is not right and should not be implemented. ICANN is refusing to meet with the White House to discuss this voluntary move, which is what we're talking about here. So even before the act is introduced, the US government's talking to registrars about, well, could you just block them anyway? And ICANN is saying, look, it's just not appropriate that we attend these meetings. This is an appalling abusive position.
Yeah. Where's the pressure coming from? Is it the lobbying from industries like the pharmaceuticals?
I imagine so. I mean, the US government system seems to be fraught with this kind of lobbying process, doesn't it? It's if it's not car makers, it's drug companies or the old standby from the 80s, the military-industrial complex deciding what needs to be pushed through. I'm not one for conspiracy theories, really. I mean, this is businesses trying to protect their own interests.
Yeah.
But when it impacts on the rest of us around the world, it's a big issue. The drug companies in the US in particular are very fond of pressuring the US government and the various agencies into doing their own bidding. I remember a few years ago when I was the editor at Computer World, we got a story in about a local pharmacy that was selling pharmacy-only medication in New Zealand, cold medication, on its website, which is perfectly legal in New Zealand. But they sent a cease and desist letter by the Food and Drug Administration from the US because they were potentially breaching US law, which is laughable. I mean, this is the World Wide Web, not the America Wide Web. And I know they tend to forget about the rest of us, but we're all here, so get over it.
Well, then how can this be solved? Because it would be great to get rid of the sharks and people peddling the drugs that don't do what they say they should be doing. So
exactly,
what's the answer?
And it is an important issue. You know, don't get me wrong. Counterfeit materials like this can be dangerous.
Yeah,
you really want to take care of that in a big way. But the issue is whether the US government should be doing it or whether it's an organization like ICANN or IATA. There are a whole raft of these governance bodies which the US government does not control, which are trying to keep the internet up and running as it is today, you know, as open as possible lines of communication. And I think that's really where this kind of debate should be sitting. For the American government to decide that they know best. We thought we got rid of this with the change in administration in the US. The previous government was very, very keen on all this kind of thing because, of course, the internet in its infancy was created by the US Department of Defense.
But
They
Obama,
still see it as an American-owned initiative.
Obama's not quite working out like everyone thought it would.
Well, he's I don't know if it's him or he's got this IP, what they used to call the Internet Czar. Her name's Victoria Espinel, and she seems quite open and willing to have meetings. But, she's really pushing this hard-line approach to we own the Internet, therefore you'll do as we say, which is not going to work when it's a World Wide Web.
Okay, well, on to our second story about Android apps, that's the mobile operating system, leaking user data, private data, Paul.
That's right, and this is just as worrying, but for quite similar reasons. Android, as you know, is the new operating system that Google has created for mobile phones. It's taking on the likes of the iPhone and the Nokia operating system. A recent study by US universities has found that 30 popular free applications, half of them were sharing GPS data and phone numbers with advertisers and remote servers. That is reporting back on what your phone number is and where you are. And a few months ago, one of the apps, and they don't name it, was spotted sending phone numbers to a remote server in China. But to have half of the apps that they studied sending data out into the world without your permission, without your explicit permission, I should say, is really quite a worrying trend. We don't get this with the iPhone app because it's so entirely locked down.
Controlled.
You have to go through a vetting process, that's right, to get your application allowed onto an iPhone. But Android is much more open, and this is one of the byproducts of a more open approach, that nasty people will try and do nasty things. So hopefully it's early enough and the whole market is still in its infancy that this kind of thing can be weeded out. In fact, I'm sure you'll start to see apps coming out that actively monitor other apps to see whether or not they are doing it, and we'll have a bit of an escalating war. But this is really quite key to the future of, if you want people to use location-based services like Foursquare or any of these other things where you can walk into a new sector of town or a new city that you've never been to before, and because your phone knows you, it can say, right, well, Wammo, I know you like Italian food and red wine. There's an Italian restaurant on the corner that will give you a discount.
And you're not wrong there.
Location-based capability. We must go and eat pasta.
Yeah.
Pasta free. Then that's really quite important, that people trust the system, and this kind of nonsense just gets in the way of that.
Yeah, it does. Certainly worrying, perhaps a little bit shonky, Paul Brislen. Thanks.
Yes, a little bit shonky. Can do better. C-, I think.
Yeah. Thanks very much. We'll catch you on Twitter, twitter.com/Paul Brislen. See you next time.
Anytime.